Good evening.
Good evening.
Deputy Lord Lieutenant Stuart Nabler, thank you for joining us this evening. And I'm Richard Butler, I'm the Mayor of Hertsmere, and I'm personally warmly touched at how many people have come out tonight to join us. This Holocaust Memorial Day marks the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, the largest Nazi concentration camp complex, and the 30th anniversary of the genocide in Bosnia. 80 years on from the liberation of Auschwitz, anti-Semitism has increased significantly in the UK and globally. Many UK communities are feeling vulnerable, with hostilities and suspicions of others rising. We hope that this Holocaust Memorial Day can be an opportunity for people to come together, learn both and from about the past, and to take actions to make a better future for all. There are many things we can all do to create a better future. We can speak up against Holocaust and genocide denial. We can challenge prejudice. We can encourage others to learn about the Holocaust and more recent genocides. We can learn both from about the Holocaust and more recent genocides for a better future. Whilst racism and hatred do not always lead to genocide, all genocides begin with indigenous stages, including propaganda, othering, and dehumanisation. Professor Gregory Stanton has developed an academic model outlining the 10 stages of genocide, demonstrating that genocide is a process that develops in stages that are predictable, but not inventable. At each stage, preventive measures can stop it. Learn about the Holocaust and more recent genocides can help us all identify the warning signs to the world around us. Now I'd like to take this moment to welcome Penny Brewster, who will say the next speech. Thank you.
Deputy Lieutenant, Mr. Mayor, Mayors and Chairs, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to read something that's prepared for the Lord Lieutenant. He apologises, he's taken to his bed, he's not very well, and so I would like to read this on his behalf. The Holocaust was the attempt by the Nazis and their collaborators to destroy all Jewish people in Europe. It took place across 22 different countries, with the active participation of some of the citizens of those countries. Building upon centuries of anti-Semitism, persecution of Jewish people began as soon as the Nazis came to power in Germany in 1933, literally days after they came to power. Classification, dividing people into us and them, followed with the Nuremberg laws, which discriminated against Jews, stripping them of their German citizenship. They were forced to wear the yellow stars, a visual manifestation of the hatred which escalated to dehumanization, polarization, and persecution. Ultimately, it led to the extermination of 6 million Jewish people. How many times of everyone in Hertfordshire that would be? Helen Aronson, MBE, was only 12 years old when the German army arrived at her home. She was one of around only 750 people to be liberated from the Lodz ghetto out of 250,000 people. Her mother and brother survived, but her father was murdered at Chelmino. Today, she shares her experiences to school children to ensure as many people as possible can learn from the past for a better future. The stages of genocide are also evident in Bosnia. As recently as 1992, non-Serbian citizens in northwest Bosnia were forced to wear white armbands. This was a few years before the genocide in Srebrenica in 1995, where around 8,000 Bosnian Muslim men and boys were murdered. Whole families and whole communities were wiped out in the Holocaust, and in many cases, we don't even know the names of those murdered. David Berger was born in southeast Poland. He left his hometown when the Germans invaded in 1939 and was shot dead in Vilnius, Lithuania, 2 years later. It is estimated that he was 22 years old when he was murdered. Before he was murdered, during the Holocaust, he wrote, "If something happens, I would want there to be somebody who would remember that someone named D. Berger had once lived. This will make things easier for me in the difficult moments." Whilst David's life was taken from him, we can honour his memory and remember him. We can assert the truth of his history in the face of contemporary Holocaust denial and distortion. There were also some people who opposed the Nazis, who realised they could and had to take action. During the Holocaust, the White Rose movement, a group of 5 students and their teacher, challenged the Nazi regime, asking German people to react to the violence and oppression which were all around them. But ultimately, they paid with their lives. At this point, Robert Voss would embellish what I've just read with some of his own story. Robert is the first Jewish Lord Lieutenant in the country. His grandparents were killed in the death camps. I think I was trying to ask Stuart earlier, I think we might have heard 55 members of his family were lost. He carries the yellow star around with him wherever he goes. And yesterday, we both had the pleasure of meeting Kitty Moxham. I don't know whether any of you have met her. She is an Auschwitz survivor. And it was a great honour to meet her and to hear that her overriding desire is that we let the younger generation know what really happened. So I'm sorry Robert isn't with you, but I'm very honoured to be here. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Mark Rubinson. Today we remember the 6 million Jews systematically murdered by the Nazis across Europe, with many countries, along with Germany, being complicit. We also remember the Romas, blacks, disabled, gays, and other targeted murdered groups. The Holocaust perpetrated against the Jews is unfortunately unique, in that all its victims were murdered not because of anything they'd done, simply because they were Jewish. Deemed Jewish were murdered even if they had one Jewish grandparent. My father, Alan Rubinson, was a Polish concentration camp survivor. He was truly remarkable, like most survivors, and this is his story. He was born on 22nd January 1924 in 20 Kamienna Street in Lodz, Poland, to Moshe and Esther Rubinson. Lodz is right in the middle of Poland. My father was the eldest of 4 brothers, the others being Milech, Chemia, and Shmuel. He said that life before the war was relatively normal, and he would go to synagogue early in the morning every day with his father. My father's father had a furniture and carpentry factory in Lodz, and he had been an officer in the German army in the First World War. But because of that, the family thought that things would be okay when war broke out in 1939. They weren't. At first, my father told me that very little changed. Then the SS gathered all of the Jewish people living in Lodz, ordering them to live in a ghetto, where my father and his brother Milech ducked and dived to get just about enough food and water for the family to live. One day, the SS ordered everyone to assemble in the ghetto's large square, where they separated the elderly and the young. His parents and 2 younger brothers were loaded onto a guarded truck and taken away by the SS, never to be seen again. He believed they were taken to Janów Lubelski in eastern Poland, close to the Ukrainian border. They almost certainly perished in Treblinka. Brother Milech worked in the Lodz ghetto for the Nazis until mid-1942. Then they were taken by the Germans to Wierliczka salt mine near Krakow, where they mined salt for the Germans. In 1943, they were taken in cattle trucks to Theresienstadt, where they were for several weeks. And then finally, they were taken to Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria and forced to carry out slave labour in Gusen 2, that's Gusen number 2, which was one of its hard labour subcamps. When they got to Mauthausen, they were put in barracks, forced to undress, then chased out of the barracks, naked in the snow, and had to run for 200 yards in the ice and snow to the shower barrack, where they were de-liced. They were given striped pyjamas to wear, and other Jews were forced to shave off the new inmate's hair, leaving a strip of about 3 inches across my father's head from front to back. My father and his brother Milech were taken to work every day from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Each day they were woken up at 4:30 a.m. and they had to assemble in the square, winter or summer, without shoes and in the thin pyjamas. They were counted by the SS, only returning to the barracks if everything was in order. They were only given black coffee and then taken on cattle trucks to work on Henkel engines, and they also made parts for Messerschmitts. When they arrived, they were ordered to get out quickly and often kicked and beaten. They were given soup for lunch, which contained leaves, grass, and rotten potatoes, if any could be found. In the evening in the barracks, the capo, which was the Jewish person in charge of them, gave them soup and a slice of bread. This slice of bread had to last until the next meal. This was the routine day after day. Dad said the worst things were the pains from hunger and the bitter cold in winter. We've recently had some cold days in the past few weeks. Can you imagine if it was 10 or 20 degrees colder here and you had to walk around with virtually no clothes or shoes for protection and almost nothing to eat? That's what it was like. Dad also looked after the Germans' dogs. He would cut up horse meat for the dogs to eat, which he sometimes stole for himself and his brother, which was extremely dangerous. If it had been caught that had been taken away and he would end up in the gas chambers. They slept in horrendous conditions and people died daily from starvation, disease, exhaustion, as well as the gas chambers. Dad was very streetwise and managed to accumulate cigarettes, which was effectively the currency in the camps, and they could be exchanged for bread from the guards. On one occasion, there was a huge influx of Russian and Ukrainian prisoners. Dad sensed there would be not be enough space for them in the camp barracks, and he thought the soup didn't look right that evening, so he exchanged his soup for cigarettes. There was a deliberate problem with the soup, and many prisoners became very ill and died within a few days. Unfortunately, this relieved the overcrowding. Dad was in Mauthausen with his brother Mailech until 2 months before the war ended. His brother didn't get up for a work shift for the Germans one day, and when Dad came back from his work shift, he was told that Mailech had been taken away by the Germans to the gas chambers. Dad wanted to rescue him, but other prisoners held him back. Dad never saw his brother again, and it was this that led to Dad's recurring recollections and nightmares, with him asking over and over again, why couldn't he have held on for 2 more months? As a child, I was never allowed to stay in bed. It was only when I found out that Mailech wouldn't get up for his work shift that the penny dropped for me. Staying in bed and not getting up could, in my dad's mind, lead to very bad things. In May 1945, the German guards fled when they heard that the Russians were approaching the camp, and in the chaos, the camp was liberated. Dad, with 3 or 4 others, wandered around the Linz area in Austria for several weeks, taking food from farms. He then joined the Red Army, who took him in because he was able to translate Polish, Russian and German, plus a few other languages. He was able to get a proper clothing, army uniform, plus 3 meals a day, which to him at the time was absolutely everything. He learned that other Jewish survivors were making their way to Italy to get the boat to Palestine. He left the Red Army and got a train to Modena in Italy. Unfortunately, there was no boat to Palestine. He joined the Polish section of Anders' army, which was attached to the British Army, where again he was able to get a uniform plus 3 meals a day. Eventually, he was taken by HMS Bedford to Holyhead, and then on to Bangor, and then on to Wyke, which is a small place just south of Bradford, where he was taken in by a family knowing absolutely no English. He worked in a local mill. He stayed there for about a year and then made his way to the East End of London and started working in the clothing industry, becoming an underpresser, then a skilled Hoffman presser, then a machinist. He met my mother on Yom Kippur in synagogue in 1951, and 18 months later, in February 1953, they married. With Mum, he pursued all avenues to see if any of his family had survived, but they had all perished. Dad then bought a dry cleaning business in Kingsland Road in Hackney, and as well as dry cleaning, he made bespoke gents' suits. He worked extremely long hours, 7 days a week. And with the money the business generated, he started buying rundown properties long before homes under the hammer was even thought of, with controlled and regulated tenants mainly in North London. Because of his experiences, he found it difficult to trust any tradesmen, so he taught himself plumbing, electrics, building and carpentry. By the late 1970s, Dad had had enough and wanted to spend winters in a warmer climate. He fell in love with a place called Sunny Isles, just north of Miami, where lots of concentration camp survivors lived and where the sun shone every single day. Mum and Dad spent the next 30 winters there. In 1994, he made a survivor's video testimony for the Steven Spielberg Shoah Foundation. Dad took up golf and would play virtually every day in the morning and then bridge in the afternoon. He did the same in London, and he became a very accomplished golfer and duplicate bridge player. He eventually played less and less golf as he found it too tiring and did more and more pottering around the house, building and fixing things. He attended Cockfosters and North Southgate Synagogue every week with Mum and was a well-known and popular congregant. He helped a lot of people and donated very generously to many charities, including buying a Magen David Adom ambulance in Israel, which he dedicated to his lost family. Dad put his family first, ensuring that we were protected and secure, particularly bearing in mind everything he'd been through. He shielded me and my sister from everything. In fact, up until the age of about 17, he told us that he was Belgian to protect us from his horrors. In common with many other concentration camp survivors, we knew nothing of what he had been through. About 20 years ago, I went with Dad to Lodz, his hometown, and Warsaw, where 1/3 of the pre-war population was Jewish. They were nearly all exterminated in the concentration camps. In fact, Poland had 3.25 million Jews before the war, and very, very few survived. Dad was a real character, strong man, both mentally and physically. He was a wonderful husband, father, and a truly great man. He died just over 3 years ago in October 2021 at the age of 97. If he was still alive today, he would have been horrified at how certain elements of this country and many European countries have descended into anti-Semitism, not that dissimilar to Germany and Poland in the 1930s, with tens of thousands of people being taken in by false anti-Semitic narratives, just like they did 85 years ago. Sadly, this shows exactly how anti-Semitism lies dormant and never, ever truly goes away. My father couldn't comprehend in 1939 how non-Jewish friends and neighbours and people who he'd interacted with every day in Lodz suddenly turned against him because he was Jewish. And it would have felt eerily similar today in London, with Jews and the Jewish state being vilified by so many people. Today, we remember the lost, but must continue to educate and fight against anti-Semitism and all types of discrimination. Thank you.
Thank you, High Sheriff, and thank you, Mark, for sharing your father's remarkable and incredibly poignant story. I'm Jeremy Newmark. I'm the leader of Hertsmere Borough Council. My Deputy Lord Lieutenant, Mr. Mayor, Madam Mayoress, High Sheriff, Town Mayor, Ambassador Collins, and your escorts, Reverend Collins, chairs and mayors of the County Council, and so many of our neighbouring authorities, Deputy Leader of Hertsmere, Paul Richards, Opposition Leader, Councillor Bright, Police and Crime Commissioner, and Chief Inspector Hare. Friends, you know, it starts with Nazi salutes, but they say we misunderstood. They say it was just an awkward gesture. And then it continues with Holocaust jokes, but they say it's just satire. Then trivialization becomes relativization. Relativization becomes denial. And we know that those who deny the Holocaust ultimately seek to repeat it. And inevitably, that is what happens when you abandon or compromise the political space around trivialization of the Holocaust itself. The boundaries of acceptability change, and they become hard, if not impossible, to put back. It matters not whether Musk had ideological motives for his Nazi salute. His intention as a free speech absolutist was to enable the use of Nazi symbols to enter normative political space, up to and including the US presidential inauguration itself. And chillingly, in that, he succeeded. Having let him get away with it, and indeed with some even praising him, it was as clear as day that he would go to the next stage. So now he uses his platform to joke freely about the perpetrators of the Holocaust and the concentration camps themselves. But of course he does, because those who were in a position to speak out when he supported Tommy Robinson, or more recently about his other shifting of the boundaries, and failed to do so and failed to speak out, should hang their heads in shame, because at the heart of our remembrance and at the heart of our challenge to trivialization, relativization and denial of the Holocaust must be education. And of course, that is what today is all about. That's why we've gathered in a school. And that's why, in response to the shameful, racist call of the Islamic Human Rights Commission upon our council and councils up and down the country to boycott today's commemorations, we ensured that at Hertsmere, we doubled down on our engagement with Holocaust Memorial Day by producing an educational video for all of our local schools. It is by educating about the Holocaust that we challenge the myths. I want to take a moment this evening to remind ourselves about some of those myths around the Holocaust that have been promoted even in recent years and months. Because each of those myths is gaining traction in our increasingly turbulent world. Essentially, there are 4 different myths that have been created around the Holocaust and multiple variations on those 4 themes. There's the Iranian version, also adopted by neo-Nazis, saying that the Holocaust didn't happen. It was invented by Jews to further the aims of Zionism. Another myth, and we've all heard it, is that it half happened. It wasn't quite as bad as Hollywood and others have made us believe. This myth is normally articulated by those who also claim that the real pity is that Hitler never finished the job. The third myth is that it happened, but the Jews and many of the others deserved it. And the fourth myth is that it happened, but now Jews are the new Nazis and Palestinians are the new Jews. That is the myth that most recently has appeared on placards held by marchers around the streets of London. That's the myth that led to the destruction of a public Hanukkah menorah up the road in Bricket Wood, as if destroying a Jewish religious symbol in Hertfordshire does anything to build a better future for Palestinian children in Gaza. And that's also the myth that sits at the heart of attempts since October the 7th, 2023, to misappropriate and redefine the very meaning of the word genocide itself. Genocide, the word for one of the most deplorable crimes ever conceived by the human mind, which stands alone in its utter depravity as the very epitome of evil. To use that very word to describe the tragic loss of civilian life in a war of self-defense, to level that accusation against a nation, a Jewish nation, protecting itself from a terror organization like Hamas, itself formally committed in its own charter to genocide, is nothing short of warped. And that's the sort of slippery slope that risks actually making that deplorable crime possible once again in our own time. That's what propels the narrative associated with the third myth that I just set out, that the pity is that Hitler never finished the job. To be absolutely clear, one of the defining features of genocide, in addition to the pre-planning, the intent and the level of orchestration, is the sheer scale of the crime. And the sheer scale of the Holocaust, friends, can be overwhelming. The number of Jews alone murdered every single day was the equivalent to the death toll of one single day on 9/11 in the USA. A minute's silence for each of the Jewish victims of the Holocaust would last over 11 years. And that's before you add the LGBTQ+, Gypsy Traveller, Jehovah's Witness, disabled, and so many other groups of victims of the Nazis to the 6 million. The numbers are so overwhelming that it's often easier to reflect on individual and specific examples. So let's take one this evening, the small Polish town of Eisheszoch, about the size of Shenley, a few thousand people, Jews had lived in and around Aishashoch for over 900 years. Farmers, teachers, physicians. The Jews in Aishashoch lived in harmony with their neighbours. They contributed to civic life, just like our own Jewish community does so admirably here in Hertsmere. In 1941, the Germans came. On the 21st of September, every single Jew in Aishashoch was rounded up. And on the 25th and 26th of September 1941, the Jews of Aishashoch were shot. 989 men, 1,636 women, and 821 children. Only a handful survived. And one of that handful was a 4-year-old girl who ran away and hid until the end of the war. After the war, she left for the United States and became a renowned historian. Her name was Yafa Eliach. Yafa spent 17 years reconstructing and writing about the story of Aishashoch. She wrote a moving book about it I'd recommend to you all. It's called There Once Was a World. And the title of that book encapsulates not just how the world of the Jews in Aishashoch was extinguished in 2 days in 1941, because as we know, this happened in village after village, town after town, until the Germans decided it was all too inefficient. So they built the extermination camps, Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, Sobibor, Belzec, Majdanek, Treblinka, and others. And the entire world of European Jewry was extinguished over just a few years. And what puzzled Yafa should puzzle us all. She was puzzled that no one in Aishashoch said a word. There were no protests before it happened, none when it happened, and none after it happened. And what should also puzzle us here today is that it was just the same in Bosnia among the Serbs, the Croats and the Muslims. And it was just the same in Rwanda between the Hutus and the Tutsis. Families who'd been friends for lifetimes became enemies overnight, as Mark so poignantly set out in his father's testimony a few moments ago. In Rwanda, 80,000 people murdered by their neighbours in under 100 days. So, friends, that is why, if the cry of never again means anything, never again must be now. That's why we can't stand by and fail to say a word when billionaires and social media moguls defend the far right in Germany, make Nazi salutes at presidential inaugurals in the USA, and tell Holocaust jokes and promote anti-Semites on their platforms. That's why we can't remain silent when a Hanukkah menorah is destroyed in Hertfordshire. And that's why I will not remain silent when people seek to create communal discord over this council's actions to support the establishment of Borehamwood's new mosque. It's also why we must remain steadfast in maintaining those boundaries I talked about at the outset of these remarks, in detoxifying our discourse. Because 40 years ago, it was Holocaust denier David Irving churning out pamphlets on a Gestetner machine in a little flat in central London. Then it was the Sunday Times publishing Irving's so-called Hitler diaries. Then it was the Republic of Iran funding a global Holocaust denial industry and terror groups seeking to repeat the murder of Jews on an industrial scale. It starts with discourse, but it never ends with discourse. Even more important are the actions that we take to shape more enduring responses to hate, building and creating communities like this one here in Borehamwood, where we celebrate diversity. We recognise what the late Lord Sachs termed the dignity of difference, and where we understand that diversity strengthens us, makes our places more resilient, and creates more opportunities for our children and for our grandchildren. Friends, it's true. We can't change the past, but we can shape the future. We can heed the message and the legacy of the survivors, like Mark's father, which is enduring testimony that out of the wreckage of destruction, if we fight hate with love and darkness with light and challenge terror with determination and death with life, out of that destruction of European Jewry and so many more, something can indeed be redeemed from that terrible past. Friends, I'd now like to introduce Reverend Sarah Marshall, the Mayor's chaplain, to lead us in the Holocaust Memorial Day prayer.
So let us pray. Loving God, we come to you with heavy hearts, remembering the 6 million Jewish souls murdered during the Holocaust. In the horrors of that history, when so many groups were targeted because of their identity, and in genocides which followed, we recognise destructive prejudices that drive people apart. Forgive us when we give space to fear, negativity, and hatred of others, simply because they are different from us. In the light of God, we see everyone as equally precious manifestations of the divine, and can know the courage to face the darkness. Through our prayers and actions, help us to stand together with those who are suffering, so that light may banish all darkness and love will prevail over hate and good will triumph over evil. Amen. I please invite you to stand for a 2-minute silence. Thank you. Please be seated as we watch this next video.
One day, my life, my world was turned upside down. It was in 1994, genocide in Rwanda. During that time, I lost my mom, I lost my two brothers, I lost 80 people of my extended families. I want to share one day when I cried for my father for me to hide. I was 12 years old at that time. My eyes saw what no child should ever see. I saw a child stuck in its mother's breast, and the mother was killed. I was devastated. I could not do anything. And I live with that memory always, thinking that I could have done something better to her. My mother was killed on my birthday. I know how to live every day, grieving her, learning how to blow the candle my birthday cake, always remembering her and the legacy that she has left with us. One day I was queuing to be killed, and the line was getting shorter and shorter every second. There were only two people in front of me when someone shouted that the bank in Kigali, in the capital city, was being broken into. And all these kids ran to go and get money, and I survived that day. I lived every day thinking, this is the day that my life will go. At the bank in Kigali, in the capital city, was being broken into. And all these killers ran to go and get the money. And I survived that day.
Thank you. Today, Holocaust, distortion, denial, and trivialisation are all increasing. Holocaust denial is an attempt to deny the Holocaust happened. Holocaust distortion is when the Holocaust is acknowledged to have happened, but the extent or nature of the Holocaust is questioned, minimised, trivialised, or even inverted. For example, when the Jews today are likened to Nazis. Holocaust denial and distortion are both forms of anti-Semitism and should be confronted. 80 years on from the liberation of Auschwitz, as living witnesses rely on us to carry forward their legacy, silence must not be an option. This Holocaust Memorial Day, we all have an opportunity to take action for a better future where people are not suffering, prejudiced or persecuted because of their faith, ethnicity or other characteristics. 80 years after the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, we must become the generation who carry forward the legacy of witnesses, remembering those who were murdered and challenge those who distort or deny the past or discriminate or persecute today. We can only mark Holocaust Memorial Day 2025 by committing to making a better future for us all. Thank you. I've asked 6 people to light candles of remembrance. May I ask those 6 to make their way to the front of the stage, which I think, to be honest, I think you're all there anyway. So the first person I've asked this evening is the Deputy Lord Lieutenant Stuart Nagler. He will light the first candle for the Holocaust. Thank you. Thank you. The High Sheriff of Hertfordshire, Annie Brewster, will light the second candle for the Nazi persecution. Thank you. Thank you. The Chair of Hertfordshire, Councillor Terry Douris, will light the third candle for the genocide in Cambodia. Thank you. The Alderman of Hertfordshire, Councillor Rabbi Alan Plancy, will light the fourth candle for the Rwanda genocide. Thank you. The Deputy Leader of Hertsmere Borough Council, Councillor Paul Richards, will light the fifth candle for the genocide in Bosnia. Thank you. The Leader of the Conservative Group, Opposition Leader, Councillor Maurice Bright, will light the sixth candle for the Darfur genocide. Thank you. These 6 candles are lit to remind us not to forget and to strive to support the weak and the oppressed. Just before we close, there are a significant number of individuals who have helped to make this evening the success it has been. I'd like to take this moment to thank the Deputy Lord Lieutenant of Hertfordshire, Annie Brewster, for sharing also the Lord Lieutenant of Hertfordshire's story, so thank you. Our speaker, Mark Rubenson, thank you so much for coming and also for the participation you took within the video. That means a lot to us. Thank you so much. Welland Garden City Male Voice Choir and the members of your team that are hiding behind the stage here, thank you. The Hertsmere Volunteer Police Cadets for their help in organising the lanterns this evening. The Leader of Hertsmere Borough Council, Councillor Jeremy Newmark, for his contribution. The Mayor's Chaplain, Reverend Sarah Marshall, thank you. And a big thank you to Hertswood Academy, who made it possible for us to be here in this great theatre tonight. And also thank you to James, one of our officers at Hertsmere Borough Council, for tonight as well. Thank you. Thank you all for attending and for your support. May I wish you all a very good evening and a safe journey home. Thank you.